house was old. It had to be at least 100 years old. Thick brick walls, high ceilings, almost 3 meters tall, and even the main hallway had parquet floors. Living in such a house was pleasant. You could feel the spaciousness and volume. Of course, there were flaws too. Ancient pipes and indestructible mosquitoes in the basement. Besides all its pros and cons, this house had one more downside, a completely insane layout. The entrance to my apartment was at the end of a separate hallway. Even more, mine was the only door in that hallway. I didn't even know what my neighbors looked like. I suspect this unique apartment placement was due to the building being constructed in phases. Perhaps my place was added later, or maybe it used to have a separate entrance. Really, it only mattered because I didn't have a clear sense of the building's inside layout. After a couple of turns, I was completely lost, and only the view from my windows told me that I wasn't living in the corner apartment. The apartment was rented. Some pensioners had lived there before, but their children had taken them to live with them, and the place was now available for rent. Since I found the apartment through acquaintances, there were no major problems with moving in or with the lease conditions. I agreed that I would do some minor repairs and get rid of the old furniture. Luckily, no one tried to defend the decrepit Soviet-era cabinets and buffets. That's when I stumbled upon the window. That day was sunny, with only a few small clouds floating in the sky. In short, it was a fantastic day. Not that I was enjoying the weather, though I was wrestling with one of the old cabinets. Its back panel, a solid slab of thick oak boards, was screwed into the wall. In fact, the cabinet itself was literally hanging on those boards, and taking it apart turned into an absolute nightmare. Drenched in sweat, I finally managed to beat that damn wall and was surprised to discover a window behind it. Old weathered shutters, dirty glass, and a meager stream of light seeping in from outside. I was quite surprised to find a window in the far wall of the apartment. After finishing with the boards, I opened the window and looked outside. It faced a small inner courtyard. More precisely, I'd call it a light well or air shaft, because I didn't see any way in or out. What was even more curious, there were no other windows facing it. Apparently, this window was simply punched through the wall for the convenience of former occupants. Shrugging, I closed it and went back to my struggle with the furniture. The window, of course, puzzled me a bit. My original plan was to install a pull-up bar where the cabinet had stood, but this damned hole in the wall changed everything. For a moment, I even considered bricking it up, but then I thought it would be much better to put my desk by the window instead. The little courtyard outside was tiny and, judging by its size, probably saw the sun only during the summer midday. Additionally, there was a small canopy above the window, obviously to protect it from the rain. On the inside, the walls were painted a light, pleasant orange color. Apparently due to the lack of sunlight, the paint hadn't faded or started to peel. Rain pounded against the windows. I had just come home soaked to the bone and as angry as a swarm of devils. A day that started out clear had turned into a biblical flood within just 2 hours. Of course, I couldn't get a cab. The city was paralyzed by traffic, and nobody wanted to take my order. After undressing and taking a hot shower, I sat down with a book. I wasn't in the mood for work or movies, but a book helped me get distracted. I decided it would be most comfortable at my desk, so I plopped into my chair and immersed myself in reading. Luckily, the sunlight from the window made for perfect lighting. When it dawned on me that there was sunlight coming from that window, I can't say. Half an hour? An hour. I jumped up as if stung and just stared at the courtyard, drenched in sunlight. Had the rain really ended so quickly? A bit confused, I went over to the other windows. Rain and clouds. But their sunlight, even if you couldn't see the sun from the courtyard, and a dazzling blue sky. My hands started to shake. Was I going crazy? Staring at the window as if it might leap at me, I backed out of the room and went to the kitchen. Okay, first coffee, strong, and a bit of cognac. No, a lot, even more, for the nerves. Then, a cigarette. The rain outside was beating against the windows, as if reminding me that there couldn't be rain everywhere, yet sunlight in just one place. A meteorological anomaly? I leaned on my hand, took a deep drag, and started coughing. Right, I rarely smoke. Very rarely. Okay, if I'm losing my mind, then technology is man's best friend. It won't let me down, right? Armed with my phone, I peeked into the room. The window was still shining with sunlight. With trembling hands, I pointed the camera at it and took a photo. For a split second, my screen went dark, and I half expected the window to show a blank wall, with me being dragged away by orderlies any moment. But nothing of the sort happened. The phone faithfully displayed the sunlit rectangle of the window. Nonsense. That can't happen. Or can it? I nervously thought through my options. Should I share this discovery? But with whom? Friends? Well, there were one or two friends I truly trusted. But what if it was dangerous? Then I'd be putting their lives at risk, and that was unacceptable. Pacing through my apartment, I weighed all the pros and cons of telling someone. In the end, I decided the best approach would be to investigate alone and then decide what to do next. The next week was spent on preparations. I bought climbing gear ropes, carabiners, harnesses, and everything I needed to descend into the courtyard. I decided to start my investigation with the simplest step, a descent. So, a week and 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, I had a light breakfast and went to the window. I moved my desk aside and secured the ropes in several places. Just in case one knot didn't hold, the others would serve as backup. I leaned halfway out of the window and took a look around. Smooth walls, the overhang, and somewhere, one floor above the edge of the roof, the ground was about 4 meters below. I forgot to mention I live on the second floor. Exhaling and tugging on the rope a couple times, would it hold? I slid out the window and dangled my legs. A slight tremor ran through me. One small step for man. I began to carefully lower myself down. In the end, I was hanging a couple of meters above the ground, clinging to the overhang with my hands. Cursing under my breath, I pushed away from the wall and dropped down. The landing jarred my legs, and I fell onto my side. Nothing seemed to be broken. I got up and looked around. Nothing extraordinary. Firm, well-packed earth under my feet, walls on all sides, and a single lonely window that I had just climbed through. Tilting my head back, I looked up at the sky. It was clear and blue. Did it ever look any different here? I took a deep breath, about to shout something, but stopped myself. Who knows what could happen here? What if I attracted a predator? Suppressing my urge to yell, I exhaled noisily. Well, that's that. Expedition to the other side was over. Time to go home. Grunting and panting, I climbed back up. My blood hammered in my ears like a blacksmith. My heart felt like it was about to leap out of my chest. No, it wasn't the climb, just nerves. My hands shook. My head was spinning. Another world? It seemed so. A million, no, a billion questions. Ideas and plans swirled in my mind. No, I had to calm down. I could barely pull myself together and, giggling like an idiot, flopped into my chair. Plans for Operation Roof were already taking shape in my head. It took me a month to prepare for the second stage. I bought materials and managed to build something like a balcony, protruding 2 meters out from the window. I also replaced the old frame with a proper double-glazed unit. Getting a draft was the last thing I needed, and set up a rolling shutter under the awning outside, just in case anything nasty might be lurking out there. I also worked out the best way to get up to the roof. The answer was obvious. Make a ladder. This led to all sorts of problems. A 5-meter ladder on a cramped 2-meter balcony was not ideal. In the end, I bought a couple dozen steel brackets and made an improvised climbing ladder by hammering them directly into the wall. This took several days, mostly because I kept experimenting to make sure they wouldn't come loose. My early attempts nearly ended in disaster. One bracket broke free from its mount, and I fell from the third floor straight down. The only thing that saved me was that my foot got tangled in a rope dangling from the balcony. I ended up hanging upside down, breaking a couple of boards, but otherwise unharmed. One way or another, after some time, the hard work was done. I surveyed the crooked, uneven row of brackets, my engineering masterpiece, which stretched all the way up to the edge of the roof. When I hammered in the last one, it took a truly superhuman effort to resist looking over the side. This was supposed to be my triumphant moment, not a sneaky peek from behind the edge of the tin roof. Finally, the day arrived. I prepared thoroughly a backpack with food for the day, a sleeping mat, a supply of water, a flashlight, my ropes and harnesses, and my main weapon, a camera. I borrowed it from a friend for some use, along with a telephoto lens, a macro lens, and a regular wide-angle lens, and of course, a compass. I hadn't thought to bring a tripod, but even so, my equipment made me nervous as I climbed to the roof. I kept staring at the tin roof. Its edge flashed. A strip of sky. No, man, hang in there. Pull yourself up. Stand on your feet. Catch your breath. Fix your backpack. Ready? It's time. Closing my eyes, I lifted my head, took a few seconds to steady my heartbeat, and prepared to open my eyes. What awaited me? The Garden of Eden, a scorched desert, an endless steppe, fog, and rocks protruding from it in places. To be honest, I was a bit disappointed. The sight was not particularly impressive. Lonely stone boulders, like icebergs, frozen in the waves of drifting fog. Sometimes the mist would swirl up to 40 meters high, forming unusual rings and curls. I walked to the edge of the roof, counting my steps. 8, 30, 100. I stopped at the edge and looked back. Interesting place. I had walked 100 steps, but visually the distance was only about 20 or 30 meters. Spatial anomalies? A cold chill ran down my spine. If space is warped here, maybe time is too? I suddenly wondered if, while I was walking those 100 steps, a whole day had passed at home, and I had work the day after tomorrow. For some reason, the thought of being late for work overrode my curiosity about exploring this strange world. I rushed back. 3, 5, 8. I almost tumbled straight down into my courtyard. What the hell? I looked back. Yep, 20 meters. Going there, 100 steps, coming back 8. How convenient for making a quick getaway. Climbing down, I rushed to my computer. Date and time. Come on. With trembling hands, I managed to open the calendar on my second try. The same day. Only 20 minutes had passed. Breathing a sigh of relief, I sat down. Time was normal. Okay then, back I go. My anxiety shifted back into excitement, and, after refueling with a sandwich, I headed out again. Climbing back onto the roof, I remembered something I'd always wanted to check as a child. Let's see what the compass says. I took it out and peered intently at the needle. It spun halfway and froze, pointing north. I tilted my head to estimate by the sun and was caught off guard. There was no sun. Looking around, I realized something else important. There were no shadows here, at all. It was like a cloudy day, but with plenty of color and contrast. This bothered me for some reason. Light from nowhere? Mystical. On the other hand, windows leading to other worlds aren't exactly ordinary. I made my way to the edge of the roof, keeping one eye on the compass. The needle continued to point stubbornly in the same direction. This time, the edge of the roof was 70 steps away. Noting the number to myself, I looked over the side. From outside, the house looked rather dilapidated. Vacant window sockets stared forlornly at the bleak, fog-covered landscape. The fog swelled against the building like a boundless, milky ocean. I thought I saw some movement below, but no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anything clearly. Surveying my surroundings, I began to circle the perimeter of the roof. The sheet metal bent and echoed under my feet, creaking and groaning with every step. I took some photos with the wide-angle lens, then attached the telephoto and took a few shots of a distant rock. My inspection revealed one thing. There was no way down, at least, none that I could find. At the same time, I noticed the fog seemed higher. I couldn't be sure, but after walking along another wall, I saw it was now reaching the level of the second floor windows. Before, it had barely touched the tops of the first floor windows. For some reason, this unsettled me. Meanwhile, I finally noticed it was getting darker. Earlier, the sky had been a clear azure, but now it was suffused with the deep red of sunset. I must admit I felt far from comfortable. More importantly, I now saw finally there were shadows. The giant boulders scattered across the valley now looked like a clenching titanic fist. All the shadows pointed in my direction, or at least toward my house. I hurried back, one step, two, 10, 100, but my courtyard didn't get any closer. I sped up to a run. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was chasing me. After 20 minutes, drenched in sweat and with my heart pounding out of my chest, I nearly tumbled off the damn roof. I glanced back, seeing the coals of the dying day reflecting in the fog as it started to dance atop the roof. One more minute and it would sweep toward me. Slipping on the steps, I scrambled down. The boards groaned as I leapt onto them, skipping half a meter of steps, and tumbled into my apartment, slamming the window and dropping the shutter with a clang. The apartment was silent and pitch dark. Turning on my flashlight, I found the light switch and turned it on, staring at the window. But all I could see was the closed shutter reflecting my flashlight's beam. Still fully dressed, completely exhausted, I collapsed onto my bed and fell into a dreamless sleep. In the morning, I opened one eye and scanned the room. My body ached after yesterday's run. The light bulb warmed the ceiling above me. Groaning, I got up and stretched. Peeking through the regular window overlooking my familiar street, I saw another gray, overcast day outside. I glanced at the window and the shutter. No, no expeditions today. Work tomorrow. I didn't need another chase with the fog. Repeating that thought to myself, I grinned. Idiot. Likely the house was surrounded by marshes. Fog is normal for marshes, even on clear days. And in the evening, as everything condenses, it rises. Here I am inventing supernatural explanations. Idiot. The day passed in routine. Whatever theories I had about the window and the fog, I did my best to forget them, and only in the evening did I sit at my computer to look through the photos. To my deep disappointment, they all turned out overexposed, every single one. It made no sense. Digital photos shouldn't get overexposed like that. For that to happen, an unsettling thought shook me. Radiation. Damn it. Idiot researcher. What if this place is as radioactive as Chernobyl, and I was there in shorts and a t-shirt? That theory left me sleepless, tossing and turning all night, nervously bracing to wake up bald, and with my organs turned to jelly. But morning came with no signs of radiation sickness. Even so, I ordered a Geiger counter, and as soon as I got it, I put it in my backpack. I won't bore you with the details of my experiments and checks. I'll just say there was no radiation. None. Not even background noise. I never stayed longer than half an hour and focused mostly on studying the physical properties of the new world. For instance, I found that distance here depended on desire. The harder you wanted to get somewhere, the farther you had to walk. And apparently my escape from the fog was successful only because I was thinking more about catching my breath than escaping danger. Sometimes, clearing my mind of any desire, I could cross the whole roof in 3 steps. One time, I forgot my notebook at home and must have covered half a kilometer before returning to the courtyard. I also discovered another important property. The compass didn't point north at all. It pointed to the window. I spent a day wandering back and forth to check this theory. One of the most significant discoveries was determining the level of the nightly fog tide. I found a special paint that responded to moisture by turning bright yellow in the fog. I painted a 3-meter long board with it and set it upright on the roof. In the morning, I checked the result. 2 meters exactly, plus a couple of streaks reaching up to 3 meters. Apparently, those spikes were like the ones I had observed earlier. The next step was Project Tower. It took almost 3 months, but in the end, I managed to build a 5-meter observation tower. It was truly hellish work. I never thought it could be so hard to build something like that alone. Still, the last nail was hammered in, and I was ready. During construction, I also rigged up a small winch at the top, which made it much easier to lift even heavy loads onto the roof. I'll admit I was terrified. No. More than that, I was so scared that I put off my first overnight stay on the tower for almost 4 days. The tower, coated with moisture-sensitive paint, helped establish that some fog surges reached 4 meters high. Considering how much the fog frightened me, I didn't immediately have the guts to spend a night up there. So I dressed warmly, packed food and 2 thermoses of hot tea, several lamps, 2 kerosene, 2 electric, and a couple of chemical glow sticks, and set out on my expedition. I climbed the tower just as dusk was falling. From that height, I could see much better. The house stood in the center of a massive valley, right at the bottom. The fog, which I thought only rose up at night, was actually just flooding into the valley, flowing from somewhere beyond. The first couple of hours revealed nothing new. The mist surged, coiling against my house's walls. Then, it slithered over the edge of the roof, and thousands of ghostly serpents came writhing toward me. I watched, mesmerized by the graceful dance of shadows. It was beautiful in its own way, although the silent advance of that milky wall nearly drove me to climb down and run for home. The sky turned crimson, then black and red, and finally the last of the color faded. Above me now was a dome of utter night. The darkness, pushed away by my 2 lamps, seemed to thicken by the second. I could literally feel the springy sphere of night closing in around me. As claustrophobia started to set in, I lit one of the kerosene lamps. That helped for a while. The flickering flame, its warmth and gentle, steady light, pushed back my grim thoughts and feelings. I even worked up the courage to tie an electric lamp to a rope, and lower it from the tower into the raging sea of fog. I'm not sure what I saw, but it seemed like a huge, 3 meter long, pale, ghostly hand made from fog tried to grab the lamp, but crumbled apart in midair and dispersed completely. Aside from the heart-freezing feeling that something was watching me, the night passed quietly once the sky began to lighten. The fog receded, and within an hour, the valley had returned to its usual state. A week later, I decided to share my discovery with my friends. Since I hadn't encountered anything genuinely dangerous beyond the window, I decided to let a couple of my closest friends in on the secret. We agreed to keep things quiet for as long as possible. Of course, we knew that sooner or later, we'd either blab or grow tired of the whole thing and hand it over to the proper authorities. But we didn't want to give up the fame of pioneers just yet. Idiots. So the team now included me, Garrick, and Slava. We had studied together at university, and I knew both of them inside and out. Garrick, to be fair, hesitated and tried to talk us out of it, saying, "The hell with this supernatural stuff gives me the creeps." But Slava persuaded him to stay, promising that at the first sign of danger, we'd shut everything down and alert the authorities. Naturally. In the evening, as the sky began to fill with the deep red of sunset, we started our bold venture. Slava and I stepped a few paces away from the roof's edge and lowered the cage with the rat to the ground. The animal didn't seem anxious at all and calmly groomed itself. We added some food and water, covering the cage with a warm blanket since it got pretty chilly at night, and freezing the poor creature was not part of the plan. Meanwhile, Garrick was busy on the tower. He snapped a few panoramic shots with the digital camera, then did the same with the film one. He didn't bother reviewing the results. It was already getting dark, and we had to hurry. Setting up a couple of cameras hooked to an uninterruptible power supply, he quickly climbed down. Within a few minutes, we were back inside the apartment, slammed the window shut, and lowered the shutter. We weren't in the mood to stare at the ghostly shifting mass outside the window, and instead, we dove into looking at the photos. At first, I thought it wasn't the right picture, until I noticed the familiar fence at the bottom of the frame. That was the one by the edge of the roof. Beyond that, things started to look unpleasant. Everything was enveloped in mist, in which tall, thin, asymmetrical figures with multiple limbs could be seen. Just looking at them gave me the chills. "We should get the rat." Slava got up from his chair, but we made him sit back down. It was too late, and everyone knew it. If this was what the fog was hiding, it was better not to go out there at all. Brick the whole thing up and forget. All the photos looked the same fog and those horrifying nightmarish shapes and the sky. Oh, and that apocalyptic sight, like an ocean of blood above, that hellish roof of the world, was held up by 7 colossal columns of pure darkness, each rising from a major rock. "Now's the time to remember the apocalypse," flashed through my mind as somebody started scratching on the other side of the shutter. We froze, listening in fear as we crept to the window, peering around the corner, ready to jump back at any moment. The noise repeated. It was like tiny claws raked at the shutter. The rat. It must have escaped the cage and was scratching to get back inside. Slava rushed to open the window, but Garrick and I held him back. Opening the window with that damn fog and night outside was utterly reckless. We heard a plaintive squeak from outside, muffled by the shutter and window, so much more heartbreaking and desperate. "Sorry, buddy. If only we'd taken those photos a day earlier." The squeak came again and then stopped, suddenly, with a high-pitched note. We stood there listening to the silence, but nothing else occurred. That night, it took a lot of liquor for us to get any sleep, and the rat's desperate cries haunted my dreams. The morning crashed down on me like an iron boot. Every move hurt. Garik and Slava looked battered and grim. It took us most of the day to get our heads straight, and only in the evening could we think clearly without wanting to throw up at the thought of moving from whatever spot we'd slumped into. We held a council. Should we try to retrieve the rat if it was still alive? And more importantly, we needed to pick up the cameras. Despite how horrific that world had looked, curiosity still had us in its grip. The final decision: Garrick would develop the film photos, while Slava and I would collect the equipment and, if possible, the remains of our unfortunate rat. After that, we planned to bring it all to the authorities and be done with this cursed place forever. Opening the shutter, we stood motionless for 5 minutes, eyes wide. The courtyard had changed. There were no rivers of blood, no demon hordes, but portions of the wall had shed their paint, revealing dark red markings beneath the plaster, just like those on the window, only far more of them. On the ground, at the spot where we'd heard the rats squeak, was a dark crimson stain. Swallowing hard, we pressed on. I stood ready below the tower, catching the cameras as Slava hurriedly dropped them down. The uninterruptible power supply was too heavy, so we left it. Nothing would happen to it. Even though evening hadn't fully set in, we wanted to get out of there before even a shred of fog rose above the roof. When the last camera had dropped to me, Slava started climbing down the ladder. For a moment he froze, staring off to the side. I followed his gaze, and my heart nearly stopped. Thin streams of fog were spilling over the roof's edge, crawling toward us. "Move!" I shouted at my stunned friend, and he snapped out of it, scrambling down the ladder as fast as he could. Once I was sure he was down, I rushed to the ladder myself. But this cursed place wouldn't let me leave so easily. A couple of meters stretched into an endless, desperate sprint. I crashed into the winch, jostling the whole structure. Slava ran over a moment later. I wrapped the camera cords around my arm and started climbing down. Slava picked a faster way. He jumped into the winch's bucket and yanked the release. With a roar, the basket shot down, the wire screamed as it snapped, and Slava's terrified face flashed past me as he landed in the courtyard, bruised but alive. Clambering down the brackets, I threw the cameras inside and dropped down a rope tied to a radiator, ready to hoist my friend to safety. The fog was already pouring over the edge of the roof in ghostly clumps. Slava grabbed the rope and pulled himself up, grunting and panting. But the sturdy synthetic cord was naturally slippery, and Slava's sweaty hands did him no favors. Less than 2 meters up, he slipped and fell back down, now up to his knees in the swirling fog. His scream, I'll never forget. I don't know what the unfortunate rat felt, but I've never heard such pain and agony in a human voice. Slava emerged from the fog. His skin was covered in pea-sized blisters, which rapidly filled with some black gunk and burst right before our eyes. The black drops spawned new blisters, which also burst, spraying black pus and blood. Gritting his teeth, eyes filled with tears, he crawled back toward me, hauling with all my strength. Soon his hands appeared over the edge of the balcony. I grabbed him and yanked him inside. Together we collapsed, just as the window slammed shut and the shutter clanged down. We lay on the floor, gasping for air. Slava was mumbling something, barely audible.